So as our folks are joining, welcome to our panelists. Of course, our topic here is proactive cybersecurity approaches and figuring out, where security debt needs the most attention, and making sure that is integrated throughout the organization. So we've got a couple of great panelists here to talk about all of these topics. And as usual, we'll let our panelists introduce themselves. So Connie, we'll let you go first, and then let Mitchell introduce himself, and then I'll ask you guys the first few questions.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's having a super day, enjoying the other sessions. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is Connie Barrera. I am the CISO for Jackson Health Systems. Jackson Health System is the third largest healthcare organization in the country from a bed count perspective. We perform every type of organ transplant, train Army surgical units and EMS personnel on our campuses, and we are highly integrated with the University of Miami. So having so many hospital campuses throughout sunny South Florida is a terrific place to be, and I'm very happy to be here. Just a quick mention, my comments and the experiences I share are mine alone. They do not represent my employer, and it'll be a cross-section of experiences throughout my career. So again, thank you so much for having me.
No, it's our pleasure, Connie. Welcome. And normally the rule is, if your organization likes what you say, you're representing them. If you don't like what you say, you're not representing them, right?
Absolutely, it goes that way.
All right, great. And welcome back, Mitchell. You're one of our veterans. You've been with us a number of times, and we love you so much. We've got you back here, and we'll of course do that with Connie in the future as well. So Mitchell, tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Thank you very much for having me, Shahid. I'm very happy to be back. My name is Mitch Parker. I'm the Information Security Officer for IU Health here in beautiful Indianapolis, Indiana. We are a 17-hospital system, largest health system in the state of Indiana, with a number of outpatient clinics as well, and also the primary training site for Indiana University School of Medicine.
Awesome. So welcome, both of you. So what I'd like to do is maybe talk a little bit about this idea of security debt. It's something that we've discussed at HealthIMPACT a few times, mostly from one particular angle, and that is, have we been taking on security debt, which is basically accumulating, missed patches, maybe doing things quickly for the pandemic that we wouldn't have otherwise done, maybe allowing more access to remote users than we probably should allow. So just from your perspective, Connie, have you guys been seeing yourselves take on any security debt that maybe makes you a little bit nervous? Not in the sense that, the hackers are crashing down and taking over, but if the pandemic wasn't here, are there certain things that you guys wouldn't have done, which is the kind of debt that we're talking about? Or do you feel that, you guys pretty much have handled at Jackson everything the way you normally would have done it, even pre-pandemic?
Well, I think we're really lucky in the sense that a lot of, I would say pretty much everything that we needed to support, all of a sudden overnight, thousands of, staff members working remote was already in place and had been in place. We've been going through a lot of digital transformation over the last couple of years, in no small part due to a bond by local taxpayers. And so really because of that, we were positioned in the right way to handle it. Now, one thing that I would say is that we took a lot of strong measures past couple of years in order to minimize the threat surface area. One of those ways was inherently back 2014, everyone with a login account would have had access to be able to VPN. That wasn't the case anymore. So it was a bit of a challenge from a training perspective, just to onboard folks that normally did not have VPN anymore, getting them with their soft tokens in order to, have that two-factor authentication from remote, things like that. So overnight, again, it was, having support staff available to handle all of these cases because we needed people to be functional and efficient. The thing that you highlighted, though, I think it is a problem that is not just unique to COVID, but will always be an issue. And that is because there are always emergencies, and there's always emergencies in a hospital. And so the fact I think the main thing is to have a strong procurement process so things don't fly under the radar. I know for years in other organizations that I worked, people would buy stuff and then all of a sudden you only found out about it because they needed integration, they needed data, or they needed, networking, something like that. And so I think COVID did present situations where all of a sudden people wanted additional robots or things like that to have less of a touch surface in certain situations. And so a lot of purchases were done much more quickly. And so vetting was really crunched to a dimension that's not typical, just because of the need to have that urgency. But I would say overall, I'm very pleased in that. There's always a concern, no doubt. There's nothing perfect, and we can be attacked any day, and we're probably always under attack. But because we had the right technologies already in place, while the density of use was much smaller, I think that gave us an advantage this time around.
Sure. And Connie, that was very interesting. The way you put it was that if you see yourself taking on security debt, it might be a procurement or acquisition problem in that people are trying to get around something, maybe do a little bit of faster trying to go on the procurement side and then remove some requirements instead of following a proper path, which is accelerated and can be accelerated because it's agile. So doing something fast doesn't mean insecure, I think is your point. And if you're doing it fast enough, then people don't have to go around the security side to then take on security debt. Is that what you were saying?
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And, many times little blips that may happen. And I know sometimes folks in the organization are a little bit sensitive. Why did this person go around the process? Most of the times, at least in my opinion, is because the process, at least in that case, is not working. So it's time to look at the process and make those particular enhancements. And to your point, I've worked in organizations that vendors would get very creative in naming things on the bill of materials on that purchase, invoice sheet in ways that you couldn't tell it was IT related at all, because either IT had a reputation of taking forever, and which caused the business not to want to interact with IT. So having that, strong partnership where the process is everyone understands it, and it doesn't take forever. There's a need for certain time for proper review. It's not just half an hour later for an IT security review. I can't have that back to you. So there's a reasonable time frame, but within reason, that process should be spelled out. Everyone should understand, and then everyone can follow it.
Yeah, I love it. So Mitchell, can you talk a little bit about your organization and what your thoughts are around security debt, and if you had to do that? And then I'd love your comments on how do you actually set up a process which is fast enough for you to be able to do proper security, but not so fast that you miss a bunch of things. So it's a really good topic that Connie brought up. But first, talk about security debt. Did you guys take on any?
So every organization has security debt, and while I will not comment about specific instances at my employer, I will specifically say that the greatest concern I have is not with security debt accumulated in the way that you had discussed earlier. It's more with the ongoing maintenance of applications. Mm-hmm. Applications are very expensive to maintain. And one of the issues that SolarWinds brought up in very little detail is that you have a lot of applications out there that are still using ancient forms of authentication processes to be able to authenticate users from the network onto the application itself. And so if you bought an application 10 years ago, it uses an authentication technology more than likely that allows your passwords to be sniffed very easily. So one of the concerns that happened when SolarWinds occurred is that organizations that were affected by having that vulnerable version of Orion around was that all their password hashes that could expose the password of their users were visible and could be easily cracked, as opposed to having a newer version that wasn't as easily cracked. So I think the big concern, to build on what Connie is saying, because again, she did an incredible job, is to make sure that not only do you acquire something, but that you have the resources to properly maintain it and make those changes so that when Microsoft or your vendor of choice decides to upgrade the security protocols, the application upgrades as well. and keeping it maintained, because the greatest concern that I see is not in the acquisition process, it's in the continued operational management. And that's where you see a very large issue with security debt, is that people take shortcuts, people do things because with turnover and the way organizations function, the person that put the application in more than likely 5 years from now will have been 4 years removed from working on it, and a number of people have been there. So that level of security debt, which is that domain specific knowledge of how to maintain the application, oftentimes becomes an issue combined with the very simply the authentication protocols that may be used to authenticate users that may be vulnerable themselves. So keeping on the applications, keeping them operational, maintained, and keeping that domain specific knowledge, those are areas where we have significant opportunities.
Yeah. So, and everybody on the audience side, please, if you have questions, you've got the chat, go ahead and do that. And as I see the questions, I'll weave them through this conversation. But still pushing a little bit on the security debt, Mitchell and Connie, talk a little bit about very recently, the Department of Homeland Security and the White House both announced plans for zero trust for many federal agencies. And I think I believe we're in a common consensus now across the security community that we don't believe that unless you have zero trust with multi-factor authentication, at least 2 factors, that you could possibly be as secure as you could be with those, right? So talk maybe, Mitchell, a little bit about 2-factor and zero trust. And if you buy an app which has neither capability, isn't that just automatic security debt that you're taking on?
I look at that, there's another frame in there, which is federation as well. Federation allows you to take on the capability of using 2-factor with an application, even though it might not specifically support it. So that's what higher ed's used for a number of years to support all these applications with legacy authentication. They've used federation as a means around it. However, with zero trust and what the executive order says, DoD has done a version of this for a number of years, and other federal agencies have not been as well funded as DoD or had that domain specific expertise within the organization. So I would like to see how that shakes out. And these days, if you're not doing something with Active Directory authentication, federation, or 2-factor capabilities, you're right, you're immediately taking on security debt. And that's whether it's an on-premises application or a cloud-based one.
Right.
So keep that in mind.
So and I'll bring Connie here in a second, but Mitchell, please continue. And when you see the apps, do you see either federation or 2-factor or zero trust being offered normally, or do you feel like the healthcare apps that you're seeing are behind the times and they don't offer federation or zero trust or multi-factor authentication?
So I look at zero trust as being more for networking and security. For the applications itself, that's a configuration concern that you have to address. However, 5 years ago, I would have told you most healthcare applications didn't support federation or 2-factor authentication or even Active Directory integration. And now they do. A lot of them do a really good job of it. So the number is going down slowly and slowly, mainly because a lot of health systems like mine hammer vendors on, you have to have this because it's an usability issue. Doctors don't want to remember more than one password, and I can't blame them. And you have to 2-factor enable things. Again, I cannot blame them. They're trying to get their job done. And if you can get it done with the same login and password and 2-factor as they can to get their email, you've made their job a lot easier. And that's the concern I have is, again, 5 years ago was a major concern. Now it's a minor concern, but it's still concern enough for me to have conversations every 1 to 2 months with vendors to tell them this is the year 2021. We need to have you doing SAML, OAuth, or I need to have you doing 2-factor authentication. You need to be using network usernames and passwords, not your own. You're not going to do it as well as Microsoft does.
Perfect. So Connie, are you finding the same as Mitchell, and that is that the vendors you're seeing come to you guys to be integrated or installed and deployed even through the cloud, do they have that capability of federation through either SAML, OAuth, Active Directory, Shibboleth, CAS, et cetera, plenty of options? And which ones do you guys favor with respect to apps and what they should choose as far as two-factor or zero trust for authentication.
Yeah, so many of what Mitchell says has really resonated with me, especially when he said the maintenance of applications, either in the previous question or totally relevant to this one. Because, I mean, when it comes to the applications, I can't tell you the number of times it's not, when you also talked about that debt, it's not so much the organization not having a strategy. It's not the organization being asleep at the wheel. When I say the organization, the IT division, et cetera, the business being able or willing to fund particular technologies. But when you've purchased something and all of a sudden the vendor tells you, well, yeah, you have the right to, running this on a Windows 10 endpoint, but the hardware that we sold you needs to be replaced. And to replace the hardware is going to be $5 million. It's, and these are pretty common things that happen in healthcare all the time. Other vendors which may not have a supported operating system, how that could be in 2021 is really astounding. The other thing that's very much related and that really I have concerns over is the biomed space. The biomed space is the area that's such a challenge where exponential debt, which is not unique to Jackson. I think across the gamut of the healthcare sector, that's a chronic problem that's being better addressed. And I'm sure we'll have probably a specific topic on that, so I won't go further into that. But I agree with Mitchell that vendors have gotten a lot better to support AD integration or federation. Very familiar with CAS for many years when I worked in higher ed. And our federation or our solution of choice is ADFS. Coupling that with either MFA or two-factor, depending on what the need be. But I think that many times vendors are still behind. I'm constantly in that procurement cycle and in that process of security vetting, having to push back and say, why are we using application-based credentials? Don't you support AD integration or some kind of federation solution? And either sometimes it's like a pretty big markup in cost, or they don't support it. I was just dealing with that situation last week where a particular application does not support AD integration. So I think, that while there's clearly so many problems with breaches and hacks, security concerns, there's potentially hundreds of applications in a health system that, we're expecting our users not to write down these credentials, but to commit them to memory while treating patients, in critical situations. So it's not really feasible. But until there's a more aggressive, I think, stance by, leaders, technology implementers, to get the vendors to do the right thing. Sometimes I think they can, and it's just not their priority.
Yeah, could you make the case, Mitchell? And I'm going to come back to the biomed point. Connie's raising some really, really important points. I'm going to come to biomed in a second because it's a pet peeve of mine as well. But Mitchell, could we make the case as follows? Hey, if you are bringing, let's say one of your innovation partners, a buyer at the hospital likes a piece of software. If you said, if this software has ADFS capabilities and is SOC 2 certified, you don't even need to bring me in. I will just approve it as is. Is that a silly statement? Or could we move to something that blanket-like, such that we set this requirement up in such crystal clear terms that there are some minimums that we must do? Or if you set those minimums, are you maybe at the mercy of losing some innovation because not all providers could handle it? Thoughts, Mitchell?
So I can tell you the big cloud providers have ISO certification for their environments. If it's a SOC 2, I'm still going to review it just because there could be material concerns with the SOC 2 listed in it. However, we've been pushing more towards international standards in our organization simply because we want to make sure organizations follow good processes that are auditable. They're not going to audit.
Let me pause you there 1 second. If it was not SOC 2 and it was something else, like ISO 9000 something, would you be able to pick an ISO standard that if they were certified and you got the letter, you would say, I don't even need to look at this?
Yes.
Which one is that?
Actually, I use a combination of 27001, 2017, and 27018. The latter two for cloud services. So again, someone shows me a high trust CSF or UL 2900-1, then I'm going to make this a lot less painful. And we're working with the various standards bodies to find better ways, because I don't want vendors filling out questionnaires ad nauseum from people like me. I want them taking those resources and putting them towards good international standards that they could take to not only me, but 50 other people like me or Connie and say, look, we've certified against this. Here you are. And it becomes a half-hour exercise because you've gone through the process of making sure you're completely certified, you're doing the right thing, and that you have an ongoing commitment to do so to find someone a contract. Because you look at it this way, I bring it over to the retail perspective. If you're buying a credit card device, you're not buying something that's not PCI certified from a vendor that's not PCI certified, because your bank will reserve the right to call you up the next day and say, you're processing credit cards with this, not with us, find another bank.
Right.
So we look at that and extrapolated that to the rest of what we do. And there's some great international standards out there that are being worked on that we're using, and it's cut down time significantly.
So would you say then that, let's say we have some newer vendors who are coming up with new ideas and they want to come sell that to your organization. So Connie, would you complement what Mitchell is saying and say, yeah, you know, UL 2900 or high trust CSF, 2900 and high trust CSF are too healthcare-ish enough that you could say, look, if you had either one of those, I'm kind of leaving you alone, other than, you know, just a cursory documentation review? Or would you still want to go do more unless they had some other certification? Any particular certifications you care about, Connie?
Yeah, so we've come a long way. I would say probably in the past year, there's a lot of tightening, even though we had a good procurement process. Whereas I would be the one to request, you know, high trust certification and SOC reports and things like that. Now that's done on the procurement front end, which is a huge time saver and actually much more efficient in my mind. So I agree with Mitchell fully in that, you know, if somebody high trust certified, ISO 2700, et cetera, you know, the level of vetting is less, but still there's a lot of things that I'm going to want to know, because I always say you can't protect what you don't understand. Mm-hmm. And so if a machine is behaving in a particular way, like we have probably one of our really pillars or cornerstones is a behavior analytics solution that is just phenomenal and is what helps me sleep at night. Mm-hmm. But, you know, the point being that irrespective of the technology, when me and my team don't know, is this normal? Yes or no? I think that's critical. So while the level of scrutiny is going to be different, and perhaps the level of validation and evidence is going to be very different from an organization that says, I don't even have a SOC report. No, we don't do security scanning, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But it's pretty surprising, because even very large organizations, you know, top names in healthcare solutions sometimes don't do these, you know, I guess best practice things, testing on a yearly basis, as I've seen from our vetting. But so the vetting is different, but I still want to know data flow. I still want to know, you know, what processes, protocols, services are running on the back end, because that is our dictionary. You know, that is how we know if there's a problem.
So I think, so one of the things that, you know, so for me, for example, as an engineer building and selling systems to hospital for many, many years, one of the challenges I have is exactly what you just said, which is, even if I did everything right, let's say I got UL 2900, which Mitchell is okay with, but let's imagine for sake of argument that, Connie, you weren't okay with it. Well, now I'm back to square zero, right? Now I have to go do another one and yet another one and another one. Is there something that hospitals and health system, CISOs, CTOs, et cetera, could get together to agree with, in the sense that, and maybe I'm looking for the magic words and I'm never going to hear them, that says, look, if you got this certification, I'm not going to say no to you. I still like to know more. I think, Connie, your point of understanding the data flow, et cetera, is quite different than approving to allow it into your environment. So if we divorce those two, it doesn't sound like there is still even agreement on high trust CSF or UL 2900 or ISO 27000 and those areas? Or do you think we're getting to one where hospital CISOs could get together and said, look, guys, if you did this and you gave us ADFS, we're not going to say no. We'll still like to know more just to be able to do some evaluations and better understanding. Or there aren't any standards like that that you would be able to choose and give a blanket approval to?
I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea, and I think that it's very attainable. I just think there needs to be, and I don't know what the right group for that is. I'll throw out there, for example, that the CISA that a lot of us participate with, has a lot of momentum on different initiatives. So I think from the healthcare perspective, there should be something like that. I certainly, I've no inherent objections to giving those blanket approvals based on criteria that we vetted and we agree is sound.
Great.
So I can add on to that and tell you again, based on the use case and the product, I think that's going to happen sooner than later. So what I found interesting, and I've been taking a look at, I took a look at President Biden's executive orders, and I took a look at a couple of the ones that President Trump had signed. And what I had noticed in detail is that, and this actually started with Trump, is that they were starting to reference international standards anyway, very specifically in the executive order signed on artificial intelligence. They were already referencing ISO. So I think based on the use case, based on the product, we can come to a consensus. And what's built into this executive order is trying to use established industry standards in the federal procurement process. So it's going to happen, and it's going to happen as part of President Biden's EO. It started 2 years ago with AI. We're going to move there. It's just, I believe now this executive order is going to accelerate that.
Yeah, and there's one other DoD requirement for now all DoD contractors to follow a set of requirements as far around cybersecurity, et cetera. And I'd love for you guys to think about, without answering it here, because you may have to go talk to your employers, is, hey, should we just do and say, just like the DoD requires all contractors to follow this set of rules, should you just jump onto that same set of rules? Because there are thousands of contractors that now have to follow those set of rules. And as innovators in the audience, for example, the big problem is not like we don't want to be secure. The big problem is variability in demand. When I go to Mitchell versus Connie versus 10 other CIOs and CISOs, et cetera, none of you have a unified requirement list. So what do I have to do? I don't have an or strategy. I don't have a strategy which just says I do either a UL 2900 or a SOC 2 or this or that. I have an and strategy, which means I have no strategy, right? If I have to do every single certification to go across, I've got big problems, right? So that's where I think it might be helpful for us on the CISO side at hospitals. I've spent enough time behind the scenes as well to know it is possible, but instead of trying to get a bunch of hospitals together, which might be like herding cats, maybe you just say, look, if the DoD, for God's sakes, is agreeing to this, and it took 25 years, but they agreed to have all the subcontractors at DoD do the following, does it behoove healthcare organizations to just choose that same model instead of invent yet another one? So that's just a little bit of side advice for you guys to take a look at, and I'm happy for you to respond to that. But I'd love for in the next we got about 10 minutes or so before we finish up. There's going to be more questions coming in, but I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into the biomed angle. Mitchell, you didn't say anything about the biomed side. How are you feeling about the medical device cybersecurity, starting with the MDS2 maybe to start with, and say, how valuable is the MDS2 with respect to, or MDS squared, I should say, with respect to cybersecurity, talking about the biomed side. And then Connie, you can jump in as well to talk about what do we do with all these, quote, crazy, which I've spent a couple of decades building medical devices and pushing them into hospitals. What do you make guys like us do in order to get the biomed side more secure?
And the deal is with the MDS2, the 2019 revision is a NEMA certified document. It is a significant improvement over what came before. Mm-hmm. So we make it very clear to anyone that sells us biomed, you have to produce an MDS2 2019 for the new products.
What do you
And
like
so,
about that 2019 one that you didn't like about the prior years?
so the prior years allowed for more room for interpretation and didn't ask specific questions about cybersecurity. The 2019 one does, and it hits right to the point. So, for example, medical devices, I don't have a security questionnaire if you provide me an MDS2 2019 because you've already filled out the questionnaire. The MDS2 2019 is 300 of them.
Mhm.
And I look at that, it's a NEMA certified document. I know the review it's been through, and I've spoken to some of the authors of it. It's a good document, and it covers what you need to mitigate risk.
Mhm.
For medical devices, I need every vendor giving me an MDS2 2019, not just some.
Mhm. And would you extend that to any non-medical device suppliers? If it's good enough for medical devices, which are some of the most dangerous things you have in your hospital in terms of patient lives, et cetera, could that be extended to non-medical devices as well?
It could not be. The questions on the MDS2 are so domain specific that I couldn't see applying it to a cloud service.
Got it. Yeah. So Connie, your thoughts on the MDS2 being enough, or do you do more vetting than that?
Yeah, no, the document is phenomenal. And as part of that, pretty beefed up procurement process that we put together, that is another artifact that they collect. Along with that, in all the contracts for around the same time frame for about a year now, we have the vendors commit to doing the patching. Now, I will tell you some of the very, very big ones. We had to hold up POs for about 9 months because they were reluctant. But after, especially, I think the WannaCry incidents around the world and things like that, so many different biomed pieces of equipment in different healthcare organizations being impacted, that's a huge step that we took in contract language. I think it's funny though that even though the document is so extensive, there's other things that I ask about, traffic on the network when particular to our specific configuration, right? Because perhaps a device installed somewhere else may be a little bit different. And so I think that's where we get a little hung up where, again, some of these very, very large vendors will say, well, how am I supposed to give you that? Well, when your tech is on campus and installing it and they have it operational, at least at that moment, that information could be given. So, I think we've come a long way, but those are still kind of pain points that I'm having with some of the largest OEM vendors. The other thing that we did very recently, and we're actually still in deployment phase, is procure a solution that specifically is for biomed equipment and really IoT in general. And so this equipment has the capacity to fingerprint, whether it's a CT scanner, MRI machine, whatever the case may be. It can fingerprint what operating system is running. It can enumerate whatever vulnerabilities, even, weak passwords, things like that. It can integrate with our scanning solution, vulnerability scanning solutions. So, in that sense, and then we integrate it to the SIM. So, I mean, it's night and day from even a year ago where you were very hard pressed to find any reasonable solutions to manage the biomed fleet. At least in our organization, we have, thousands and thousands of equipment from many different OEM vendors. So it would be a huge understatement to say that it's a challenge. It'll continue to be a challenge, but I think some of those critical corner pieces we're finally getting into place with that procurement of a solution to help the team that manages. Because even in our organization, I don't know about you, Mitchell, everywhere I've worked, it has not reported into IT, which is the biomed team, which is a challenge of itself, because most of the times they know how to interact with the vendors, but they don't know IT, MAC address. They don't know IP address. They don't know, that's like foreign to them. I just wonder in Mitchell's shop, if it reports to IT or is it a separate entity like it is for us?
Yeah, it's a separate entity, and The big challenge is that we've worked with them on requirements for cybersecurity, and that's specifically what you have to do for anything you put in there. You have to have those requirements. We do the purchasing, we do the security analysis. Ultimately, it comes down to having the staff on hand to do operational management of the systems and keeping them patched and updated and following up and using those IoT systems to do that. And so that process is 75% of the work, because anyone can go buy a med device security system these days. I can find 5 vendors that'll be willing to sell me one right now. How do you operationalize it in your network and have good processes that mix with everything else that you have?
Yeah,
That's the hard part.
Yeah, and another related problem, and Nick Whitney asked the question, so I'm going to ask that in a second. But the other related problem, Connie, to what you're mentioning is that most biomed vendors, the reason why they haven't been aligned to IT in the past is they were not connected devices. However, over the last 10, maybe 15 years, so I worked on some back in the early 2000s that were one of the initial ones with a network card built in, et cetera. Many of the ones that have come out in the last 10 years have had a network or Wi-Fi slapped on. But it was never, literally, the device hasn't changed, just the data transfer has changed. And that's why you have this problem, because they're not true IT devices, right? They just happen to have a network card slapped onto it at the end instead of the USB or the RS-232. But those, I think, over the next couple of years, as you see native connectivity in medical devices, those are like regular IoT devices now. And my guess is that those will enter the IT side the same way and will not be seen as a pure biomed device. So that's probably what's happening here. So let's pick up Nick's question, which is good, is that, and you mentioned a little bit of this, which is the quality of service, the network side of this, but he's asking, what would you like to have added to the MDS2 that perhaps was not caught in the 2019 version? Connie, you said quality of service, you can add to that, and then Mitchell, you can add to it as well. Go ahead, Connie.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot about the quality of service and network traffic is something that would be vital to me, because we have, like I said, a robust behavior analytics solution, and of course, any tool needs care and feeding. So I think that's really a critical piece for us to have, in addition to the what's been added. But for me personally, I feel that that's currently a void. That's my biggest void.
Yeah, makes sense. Mitchell, how about for you guys? Anything missing in MDS2 that you would like to see added?
Yes, 2 areas. Number one, a more deeper dive on federation, very specifically, and using some of the newer technologies like ADFS for authentication to devices and talking about that. And also data provenance. I think that's an area now that we're using data from these devices for big data analysis, ensuring that the data maintains its integrity throughout its life cycle. And I think a weak spot is the data going from device to system. And we need to do a lot more with ensuring data provenance. So those 2 areas, I think, have opportunities for improvement.
Got it. Great. So as more questions come in, we've got about 3 minutes to finish up here. Let's ask this one question about digital credentials. So we know that each hospital, typically, if you have your own Active Directory or whatever, you have your physicians and nurses and everybody in there as users. But physicians and nurses often work at other places as well. What do you think are the chances of us caring enough about portable digital credentials with respect to staff, such that we can ask vendors, et cetera, to start applying to that? Is there such a thing today that you feel portable digital credentials might be meaningful, or is that so far low on your priority list that it doesn't really matter at this point? And either one of you, anybody want to jump up first? Mitchell, maybe?
Absolutely. And it's something that we see coming, because you have doctors that are going to practice in more than one hospital. And you want to make it easier for the doctors that are practicing in 5 hospitals, like my cousin in Hackensack, New Jersey. So you want to, and if it's one set of credentials that meets good authentication criteria with 2-factor authentication, we would look at that. And we look at that as something, this is where it's going, because again, you have medical schools where you have residents practicing all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
You want to reduce the number of credentials people have, because ultimately that improves security if you have one really good secured system. So We see it happening. Do I see those systems happening now? No, I think 2 to 3 years, we're going to see something usable enough for our medical staff to actually be able to use it across multiple organizations.
Yeah. So if there are any innovators in the field that are looking at physician credentialing, which is a massive problem in and of itself, regardless of digital authentication is not what we're talking about. Physician credentialing as to credentialing you for a hospital that you can practice at a hospital. What I'd love to see is the ability to combine a digital credential with the physical physician credential, tie the two together so that that's portable across health systems. So Connie, your thoughts on digital credentials and where it might be sit today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we see this all the time with our own residents who, one of our campuses is a very big community where within geographic walking distance, very short distance, there's University of Miami, healthcare related businesses, buildings, I should say, Jackson Health System, and also the VA. And so our residents, rotate throughout, even on the same day. They could be visiting all of these organizations. So I think it's a very needed, it's a big need to not only service residents, but physicians, clinicians of different kinds. I know some of our nurses round also or work also at Baptist Health. So it would be great to have a structure and a framework like we trust ADFS between, partners and cloud services, the same way we trust that, to have something in place in the realm of digital credentials. I would say when you started to talk about physician credentialing, which obviously lives in a different division, I've always had huge concerns about that. Not to suggest that their work is easy, but there's a lot of, like, even cell phone numbers many times are not correct within their own system, and doctors credential pretty often. I think it's it's not my area, but I think it's like yearly or that they are regularly that they have to credential. So if there's data concerns there, so there's certainly things that have to be some housekeeping that has to take place. And so if we're to trust systems like that, we have to know that the data quality is appropriate. But I think that's the direction. And if nothing else, as security professionals, we have to poise ourselves to be informed, read up, and kind of predict and poise our systems and in line with the CIO or whoever's responsible for strategy, to see that the controls, the solutions we're putting in place are able to handle either from an audit, a reporting, or an alerting in order to spot risk and mitigate them right away.
Yeah, perfect. And just to we're going to end on that particular subject, Connie. So about in 30 seconds, if each one of you can tell us, what are you buying right now? Like, what are you looking for? What are the things that you're investing in that the audience should know about? Maybe Mitchell will go with you and let Connie finish it with her 30 seconds.
Absolutely. So I think the big investment, like everything else, I'm not going to be too specific. It's just augmenting what we have given the situation we were in over the past year.
Mm-hmm. Got it. You mean COVID?
Yes.
Yeah, got it. Connie, anything you're buying specifically? You want to be braver than Mitchell and tell people what you're looking for?
Well, and I hope this isn't cheating, but we're actually not buying technology now. What we are spending resources on orchestration, automation.
Oh. So
you want to make sure that, things that we're doing it more efficiently, we're doing it quicker, and with quality. So, that's the realm that really we're trying to focus as much as possible right now.
Awesome. Well, this was terrific. We got some good questions from the audience as well. Thank you very much, Mitchell. We're going to welcome you back at our future episode. And of course, Connie, you're welcome to the family. We'll get you back on an episode soon as well. With that, I want to thank Mitchell and Connie both. And if you guys have any questions, please reach out to them directly and join us at our closing keynote with Kevin Mahoney, which is going to start in just about 30 seconds. See you guys.
I'll be there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.